Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Bu Lam, and I am the Director of the Sanitary and Stormwater Utilities for the City of Kitchener. I'd like to begin by acknowledging and honoring the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land for millennia, and to recognize that the land on which I'm speaking today is the traditional territory of the Adirondack, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee people. We all have a responsibility to serve as stewards for the land and honor the original caretakers who came before us, recognizing how our communities are enriched by the deep-rooted traditions of the diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit today. Together, let's recognize that to do social justice work on this land, we must affirm for our commitment to decolonization in our work and in our lives as settlers. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the fourth session in the Building Equitable Cities Speaker Series, which is a series dedicated to building capacity around issues of equity and inclusion and engaging in the dialogue necessary to disrupt systemic inequality in the establishment, development, and growth of sustainable cities. In today's talk, we will explore the topic of water and service equity, which may arise due to systemic or structural issues within our community, such as poverty, discrimination, environmental degradation, or inadequate infrastructure. It also involves recognizing and respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples, marginalized groups, and vulnerable communities in the participation, management, and governance of our water systems. Opportunities to discuss what water equity looks like for our community and examine solutions and strategies to promote equity, such as investments in infrastructure, utility programs, and policy reform, are important steps to ensuring awareness, building momentum, and inspiring action toward a more just and sustainable community for us all. Now, as part of today's talk, you are welcome and encouraged to ask questions and vote for questions you would like to see answered through the Q&A function in Zoom at any time. We will have time at the end of the talk to answer some of these questions. At this point, I'd like to invite Councillor Clancy to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Boo. You've got me very excited about stormwater. There's so much I didn't know about how cities operate and how climate and equity weave in through all our departments. And I'm looking forward to learning more today about the systemic change we need and learn from our expert, Miss Bailey. I'm grateful that you could be here, and thank you to everyone for coming. Miss Bailey has been a leader in equity and community engagement, especially related to water services, for 31 years. She's the ED, the Executive Director of the Greater Cincinnati Water Works Corporation, and she has made history by being the first woman and the first African-American to lead the organization in its 200-year existence. She is currently on assignment with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agencies, working on lead service line replacements. You'll have to correct me, Ms. Bailey, if I got that wrong. But she speaks globally about the need to diversify our workforce, equity in our systems, and how we can make our cities welcoming for all, and our climate justice and our climate transformations equitable for all. She has won many awards as well. She was known as the Career Woman of Achievement by the Greater Cincinnati YWCA. She is one of Cincinnati Venue Magazine's Woman of Influence. And she's also named one of 7 African-American leaders in Cincinnati, receiving an AWWA Diversity Award. I hope you'll join me in welcoming Miss Bailey. I'm really looking forward to learning more, unpacking power and privilege, how it relates to cities, learning more about our climate path and our equity path. And hopefully we can all charge our hope batteries and get inspired to move forward with the great work that you're leading in your part of the US. Thank you, Miss Bailey.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And thanks for having me today. Get started with a nice drink of water. Okay, so I have a presentation for you. And we're going to share that now. And I'm just going to walk you through some our path of water and service equity and some examples for you. So next slide, please. I want to talk about these topics today. So I want to first consider refocusing on how we think about community. I want to touch on some guiding principles that the U.S. Water Alliance organization has outlined for us. And then I want to give you a number of examples of how we think we are in the space of water and services equity. And then I want to wrap up discussing the concept of anchor institutions. And so with that, let's go to the next slide. Community. Next slide. So I'm going to take you all the way back to my early days, the days when I grew up in Weirton, West Virginia. It was a steel mill town. From birth through high school, I was there with my family. The top picture is a picture of Main Street, and it went from downtown, and the road went north. It went all the way up to my neighborhood, which was North End. And so in this picture, the top picture, you can see on both sides of the road that there's the steel mill, sections of the steel mill on both sides of the road. The bottom picture is actually my neighborhood, North End. And it didn't strike me until I put these pictures together, you know, the irony in one picture being color and the other picture being black and white. But I think you can see the analogy and what that kind of represents as I continue with my explanation. But the bottom picture was actually my street, and all the streets look like this. This was Avenue B. We lived on Avenue B. My great-grandmother, my grandmother, my grandfather lived on Avenue A, and we would just kind of go back and forth between, you know, the houses. And then there were additional streets like this. I can remember all the way down to like G, but I think it was more than that. So Avenue A, B, C, etc. But the houses were at the top of the street on both sides. And this car is sitting at the bottom of the street, right in front of the steel mill. In fact, the only thing that separates that steel mill is really a chain link fence along that street, which is Main Street. And there were all kinds of processes that this steel mill did every day, you know, 24/7, 365 days. And we would come out in the morning, and they called it graphite. I don't know what it really was, but that's what they called it, graphite. And when we would wake up in the morning and come outside, there would be these fine particles all over our car, on the porch, the grass, the street. If I had left my bike outside the night before, these particles would be on my bike. They were just everywhere, right? And they were in the air. You know, there were processes that allowed different things to happen in the air. There was smoke, there were smells, all coming from this steel mill right into our community. And for a young girl with asthma and pretty bad allergies, this was a problem for me. I often had to spend time inside because I couldn't come outside and play certain times of the day or certain parts of seasons. And so that was a problem. Of course, I didn't know it at the time, right? That this was an inequity, right, for our neighborhood, because this was a predominantly Black neighborhood, low income, disadvantaged. And when I got to high school, late high school, we actually moved to a different neighborhood. And that neighborhood was predominantly white, and there was no steel mill in that neighborhood. You know, so this was an early experience that I had of inequities, if you will, in neighborhoods. It was very challenging, and to look back on that, it hits me a different way now. It definitely does. But I wanted to take you to that early experience because I think that was in me and really spoke to how I then addressed some things as I became director. Next slide, please. Excuse me. And so I really want to talk to you also about the fact that as I lived in that community, my mom, who's in the middle picture, the woman behind the one in the hat, she made sure that we, in this small city that was 93% white, 3% Black, that we understood the experience, that we had the experience of diversity and that we appreciated diversity. She made sure that she had a village, a community around us that was very diverse, and taught us to love and appreciate all, and to be helpful and to serve within our communities. So she had us heavily involved in our church. We, of course, had experiences with our family, but there's two pictures here where my mom's in both of them. She was a teacher, and then she became a principal. And these are her teachers and friends that are teachers and principals. In fact, the two men in the middle picture, to me, they're known as Uncle Pick and Uncle Swartz because they were very close to our family, still are to this day, and I refer to them as my uncle. But she made sure that we had this safe, diverse community around us, and this was my early understanding of community and what a community should be and how it should serve and help each other. And I took that definition and understanding of that into my adult years, to college, where I became involved more in organizations and sororities and did outreach in the community and tutored high school students and all of that. So I've always had this understanding of how a community can have a great impact on so many people. Next slide, please. And so when I became executive director in 2015, I needed to really call on that definition of community. And I realized that I needed to have a new lens on it, right? Because as much as I was looking at it and having a diverse perspective on it, I really had not looked at it and applied an equity lens down to the solutions at work. And so now I really needed to think about that as we sat around this table trying to create a new lead service line replacement program. We had been watching what was happening in Flint, Michigan. That crisis was occurring. We knew that we still had lead service lines in our community, and we wanted to come forward with a better solution on how we could quickly take those out. And so we gathered around the table, and I wanted every group around the table. I thought it was important for us to have the accountants, the IT staff, HR, communications, the scientists, the engineers, the lawyers, all of those different groups around the table, because it was a sense of urgency for us to act and come up with a new program. And I realized right away it was going to be a challenge because there were some people at this table who were not happy that we were thinking about a robust solution. They were very comfortable that we would think about just removing the public portion of the service line, which was the utility's responsibility, but they were not comfortable with us thinking about replacing or finding a way for the customers to replace the private side. And so they really looked at our attempt to solve this problem as an us versus them. Us being the utility, we'll do our job and remove the public side. Them being the homeowners, and it was up to them and not our problem of how they could afford to replace the private portion of the service line. And I really struggled with that because I thought we should be doing more in the community. We should be a leader. It was, in my opinion, our responsibility to think of it beyond just an us versus them. And I remember in one meeting, it just hit me all of a sudden, that I needed to really explain maybe a new concept for community. And I told them, I said, if we are constantly saying that water is life and that we have a product that everyone uses every day, and we're proud about the fact that we do that, then we need to recognize that if water is life, then we have more responsibility, that we need to be more accountable, that we need to not look at it as an us versus them, but more so that we are the community. If we provide this, we live in the community, we thrive in the community, we work in the community, we are the community. And so let's approach this as we have a problem and we don't want to have a problem. And that problem is holistic. It's not just the public side, not just the private side, it's the entire line. And how are we going to solve our problem? And so that was a big, really turning point. As much as it sounds so simple, it was a turning point how we really looked at problem solving and looked at our definition of community. We changed that. And at that point, we started to look at it also with an equitable lens of how we could bring better solutions within our community. Next slide, please. So as we had this new definition and understanding, we also thought it was important for us to rethink how we were connecting in the community and how we were building trust in the community. And one big thing that we did was we created a speakers bureau. And that speakers bureau, for me, I think, was really a huge moment for us because it really allowed us to connect on a different front that I wasn't even expecting. And so I'll explain to you a little bit about it. So we created the Speakers Bureau, which was about 50 employees. We trained and spent time together on how to speak in front of crowds and, you know, how to knock back a heckler and all that kind of stuff. We trained a little bit on it. And then we have 52 neighborhoods in Cincinnati. And so about 40 or 42 of them responded to us saying that, yes, it's okay for you to come to our neighborhood council meetings, which are on a monthly rotation. And we'll have a spot on the agenda for you to share information about water and stormwater. We are water and stormwater in our utility. And so we paired up and we started going to these monthly meetings. And so the first meeting was just all about us introducing ourselves and who we are, and we're happy to be here, and we're going to come every month and share information about the utility, mainly about our lead service line replacement efforts, but other topics as well. And so that was the first introduction month. The next month we came back and said, we've created a dedicated website for lead service line information. You know, here's the URL, go check out the website, find the information, share with your friends and family. And we're also working on a dedicated phone line for you to get your questions answered. So the next month we came back and we said, we have this dedicated phone line. Here's the number, share it with your friends and family. We have, you know, experts on the other end of that line waiting to answer your questions and guide you on whatever information that you need. And we're also working on free sampling. So then that next month, we came back and said, here's our free sampling program. If anybody in our service area wants to get their water sampled, let us know. We'll send you a sample kit. We'll come pick up the sample kit. We'll analyze your sample. We'll call you up with the results. We'll talk you through the results. We'll even help you figure out next steps, you know, once you get your results. And we're also working on this lookup map. Next month, we're back and we said, we have this lookup map. If you want to know the material of your service line, go to this lookup map. Put your address in there. You can find out the material of your service line. You can look up your mom's house, your neighbor's house, your son's house, any address that you have, plug it into the lookup map. And we're also working on this actual lead service line replacement program. And so we kept coming back month after month, sharing different information with them. And finally, we were able to come to them and say, we have a draft of our lead service line replacement program. Something that we think will be helpful for people to afford replacing their private side of the line. And we need your feedback. So these pictures that you actually see are meetings that we had in those neighborhoods, but also focus groups where we asked for their feedback so that we could make sure that we were bringing forward an equitable program, that everyone could see themselves in the program. And in fact, that middle picture was a fascinating meeting, because on one side of the room, there were some young white males that were flippers. They were flipping houses. And they said that our program that we were proposing was more than enough. And they appreciated that it was a cost sharing solution. But on the other side of the room was some seasoned Black women in the community that said, this is not affordable. You know, as much as we appreciate you putting this program together, it's still not affordable for me and people that I know that look like me in my neighborhood, where we are first generation homeowners and we're struggling to hold on to our houses, and we can't afford something like this. And so it really caused us to go back, take that information, and come forward with a better program, an equitable program. And so we really looked at this as a significant step for us on how we could build trust in the community, and how every time that we came back, we delivered what we said we would do. We took their information back to our program. We were showing that we were accountable, that we were dependable, that we cared, that we wanted to have a positive impact in the community. And we were out there letting them know that it was not just talk, we were walking the talk, and we were ready to take the action to make it happen. Next slide, please. So as much as we were doing that to build trust in the community, we also said there was another thing that we needed to do, and that was to humanize the utility, to let the community know, our community, know who we are, what we look like, where we're from, where we live, what we do. And so we started on this campaign really being more involved in the community, also in fun ways, right? So there's this neighborhood competition here. It's called the Neighborhood Games. And so we volunteered and raised our hand and said, we're going to be the official sponsor of the water balloon toss in that competition. And so we were out there and people could see us, you know, living and playing in our community. We knew of a school that had 2 lead lines on their property. They could afford to take the line out at their school, but not the library building. And so we worked with them and came up with a solution to help them afford taking that line out so that they had safer water for their students while they were in the library. We built a float, a parade float, and said, let's hit the road and go to all these neighborhood parades so that we can be out there, people can see us, and why not cheer for water, right? Wave and cheer for water. And so we went out to all of these parades, and we still do that. We started a weekly social media campaign, and it was called Wednesday Highlighted Worker. And so we would take one of our employees every Wednesday. We talk about what they did for the utility, but we also allowed them to share what they like to do personally outside of work. And we posted pictures, a picture that they were able to choose, and then would have that on social media so that people could see who are the people who are doing this water and stormwater work for us. And then a more recent way that we're looking to humanize the utility and build more trust is that instead of us taking stock photos of workers, if we're advertising for open positions and vacancies that we want to fill, why not use our own employees in those advertisements? And so we asked any employees if they were interested, took some nice photos. We have a few of them that have done testimonials in some of our advertisements, but this is another way that we thought we could humanize the utility and again, continue to build trust. Next slide, please. So I want to now go to water and service equity and talk a little bit about the definition of that and what it means to us. Next slide. So the U.S. Water Alliance has a definition that I think many utilities in the US really look to as a nice way to really define water and service equity, particularly water equity. And the definition says this, that we believe that water equity occurs when all communities have access to safe, clean, affordable drinking water and wastewater services, that all communities share in the economic, social, and environmental benefits of water systems, and that all communities are resilient in the face of floods, drought, and other climate risk. Now, we know there's plenty of definitions. We know that it's all over the place, and certainly that's the same for service equity. But I think if I had to sum it all up, or at least put it in my own words, I think I would say that equity considers circumstances instead of a one-size-fits-all approach, right? And recognizing that you need to look at the person's needs and meet them where they are. And so I think that's a big part of how we try to apply it, that we're trying to fill in the gaps. We're trying to understand that it isn't one size fits all, that one solution that works for one person might not work for the next household, might not work for the next neighborhood over, and that we need to, in many ways, stop applying a one size fits all solution and get to know different groups in the neighborhoods, get to know what their needs are, and then have a catalog, if you will, of ways to help people and meet them where they are. And so I think that's a big way of how we look at water and service equities and how we try to apply it to our solutions that we bring forward. Next slide. This is just a quick slide that I wanted to mention to you. The U.S. Water Alliance Pillars of Water Equity, there's a document that explains it in great detail. And if you're interested in that, I actually have the link here. But if you just Google U.S. Water Alliance Water Equity, you can find that document and learn more about the pillars that many of us here in the U.S. follow. Next slide. So I want to go back to the slide that I had in the beginning, topics of discussion, and I just want to sit here a little bit as I talk through the examples that I want to give you. The first one is one that I've been talking about, which is the lead and service line replacement program that we had. This program started in 2017, 2018, and it was at first it was a cost sharing program. It was one where we provided a credit to any customer that came into our program for them to pay for the cost of their private side of the line being replaced. And so as a utility, we would pay for the whole thing for them if they came into the program. We gave them a credit. The balance of that would have to be paid by them. They could pay it back to us over 5 or 10 years. They had the choice to pick that. It was interest-free, and it was a property assessment for them to pay it back. So if they moved from the property, it actually stayed with the property. And so we had that program. As I mentioned, we were out in those focus groups, and they said it still wasn't affordable. So when we started that program, we also put a customer assistance program with it. So low-income residents who were interested in the program but still couldn't afford it, we gave them additional funding so that they could come into the program. And in fact, by the time it was all figured out per year for a low-income resident, it was usually about $20 per month. And that's what the focus group told us that would be reasonable and affordable for more in the community. And so we had this program, we've been working through this program, and we saw about 32 to 35% customers that would come into the program when we were out doing a water main replacement in their neighborhood. And we wanted more than that. Like that was cool, right? To have 32 to 35%. It was more than some other utilities had told us that they were achieving, but we wanted more than that. And so we came back to the table and said, this is a good program, but we probably can do better. And so again, applying that lens of equity, having that definition of community and how can we do better to have a positive impact in our community, we decided that it was time for us to pitch to our city council that we think we need to pay for the entire line to be replaced, that we would pay for the public portion and the private portion, that was equitable, that was the right thing to do, and that was what our community deserved. And so we went to city council and we were able to achieve approval of that in 2021. So although we thought we had, a good stab, if you will, at equity in a program that was equitable, we knew that we could improve upon it. And so we did better, know better, do better. And that's what we certainly did with that program. My next example, number 2, is shutoffs. And I struggle with shutoffs. I always have, because if we're talking about water is life on one hand, then why are we quick to shut you off on the other hand when you don't pay your bill? So I really do have this crazy relationship with shutoffs, and I struggle with them. But nevertheless, they are a process that we have within our utility when people do not pay their bill. And so we were challenged by a city councilwoman who said, you know what? I think you are doing more shutoffs in Black neighborhoods than you are in white neighborhoods. And I want you to go back and look at what you're doing, bring me the data and tell me, respond to that motion. And so that was hard for us, because I had to bring that motion back to my team. I had to tell them, what the council member had said. And they didn't take that very well, because they saw that it was accusatory, that it was accusing them of doing something that was not the case. Many of them spoke about the fact that we had been doing this shutoff process for decades, and why all of a sudden was somebody attacking it. They really just did not like that somebody had questioned something that we had been doing, and why didn't they just take the fact that we were doing it and we were doing the best that we could. And so I had to walk them through their emotions, to get through that. But I told them, here's what we're going to do. We're going to follow the data, pull the data, and let's see what's going on. And let's see how we answer this. And long story short, without a doubt, we went deep down into holes to look at the data. And yes, the data did show that for various reasons, we found ourselves in Black neighborhoods more than other neighborhoods, more than white neighborhoods. And that because of that, we were doing more shutoffs in those neighborhoods than others. And so we had discovered that. And that was a hard pill to swallow, but we swallowed it. We certainly went forward and answered it, but then we also answered and said, and here's what we're going to do about it. Because it's not enough to just know that, okay? That's just something. But if we want to now try to have an equitable solution, then what are we going to do about it? What's the action we're going to take? And so we backed up to the beginning of our processes and basically changed a lot of things on the front end so we could avoid a high number of people getting to the shutoff process to begin with. And that's how we answered that. And that's how we brought forward a better, equitable solution for more in our community. The third example is shutoffs after COVID, because boy, has that been a doozy. COVID still is the gift that keeps on giving in many ways, and it's not a good gift. But we were without the shutoff process for 26 months. We stopped doing them and we resumed shutoffs in May of 2022. And in doing so, for the first time in the history, especially for me being there 31 years, the first time that I can remember, I asked the team, track all the shutoffs, track every single one. When somebody's shut off, track that they're shut off, track how long they've been shut off, track what neighborhood they've been in, track if somebody comes and makes a partial payment, but they're still shut off, and then marry that with some other data. marry it with the characteristic data that we have per neighborhood, marry it with foreclosures, businesses closing, et cetera. Because I wanted to understand the bigger picture. I wanted to understand the neighborhoods that are struggling more than others. I wanted to understand the characteristics that, the culture really of that neighborhood where we were seeing more shutoffs. And I thought if we knew that, then we could then come forward with better solutions, not the one size fits all solutions, but better solutions that help down in the neighborhoods. And so that's where we sit right now. We're still trying to figure out the best ways to help neighborhoods. We've had some federal funding due to COVID that was able to help certain neighborhoods. We've been able to tap nonprofit organizations in certain neighborhoods that then helped people in those neighborhoods. And now we're trying to see, my fourth example, how we can bring forward additional customer assistance programs to help different people and different groups of people. We know customer assistance programs are not the answer. They're a Band-Aid, a big Band-Aid in many ways. But we know at the heart of it is affordability and the challenges that people have with paying their utility bills at this point. And so until we can get answers around affordability, we are certainly trying to at least put in place some additional assistance programs. And that's where we are now. We're also looking at different rate structures because we think there might be some truth in bringing forward a different rate structure that will be more equitable for everyone across our service area. And so those are definitely some examples of how we're on the path of water and service equity. We certainly have more examples of that, but that's certainly a few that I can share with you today. Next slide. And then next slide, anchor institutions. So my last topic to share with you is all about anchor institutions. So the US EPA has put together a report, and it's about water utilities as anchor institutions. There were a number of utilities that were involved in creating this document. Greater Cincinnati Water Works was definitely involved. In fact, some of the phrases that I've been sharing with you today are directly in this document and on this page. But I was certainly involved quite a bit with this because I've been really on this path of thinking about anchor institutions for a while. And for me, anchor institutions are aligned with equity. How can we be of better service in the community? How can we be the community? How can we think beyond just providing this water service and collecting a bill, but to think about how we can bring forward, our infrastructure projects that help create growth and really move people from surviving to thriving. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do. We have to think beyond the old ways of doing things, right? The phrase that drives me the craziest at work is when they always tell me, we've always done it this way. It's like, well, that doesn't make it right. And we need to modernize our processes so that we are meeting the needs of the community now, not many moons ago. And so I really think a lot of what we need to do now is problem solve with an equity lens. And the concept of anchor institutions allows you to do that. In fact, one of the statements here, it says, not you or me, but we. Utilities see themselves as members of the community and approach challenges or opportunities with a collaboration mindset. What will we as the community do to achieve or overcome? And so that's really where we are now. What can we do to achieve or overcome, obstacles that are really standing in the way of people thriving? And that's where we are. And I will say that also for me, when I think about anchor institutions, it's also about what can you do to help your employees grow and thrive and do better. And I think COVID clearly has taught us a lot about how one size doesn't fit all when it comes to employees. We had to really meet employees where they were, meet their families where they were to help them, survive through COVID. And so now we learned that. We learned that it was important to not have that one size fits all lens and to do more that is equitable for all of our employees. And so an anchor institution includes all of that, not just within the community, but for the community by making sure that you take care of your employees at a utility so that they can really, lift up what it means to be an anchor institution. Next slide, please. And so with that, I really just want to come back around and just hit on these key takeaways. I hope these are messages that you heard loud and clear today. But the first one is to refocus your definition of community. If you start thinking about community and say that we are the community and you can see yourself active in it, you can get beyond what you might have had, as I did, an early definition of community, but I needed to update and modernize that definition and give it a broader lens. Then refocusing that definition might help you move forward with more equitable solutions. Also apply the guiding principles. Think about becoming an anchor institution. Encourage your employees to be active in the community, because as much as we say we are the community, then show that, right? And allow them to have some type of presence while working at the utility to do more in the community, to be a big part of the community. And then know that equity matters. And as much as we know that it matters, don't forget to tell your stories, because when you tell your stories about how you're making these changes, you can also share how you're positively impacting the community. You're building trust and you're showing up every day so that you can be the best that you can be and take the entire community forward in a positive manner. And so with that, next slide, I just want to thank you for allowing me to be here today to share these examples, to share how we are walking in the path of water and services equity. And I hope we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Cathy, for that wonderful presentation. And thank you for sharing these excellent examples of the purposeful work that you're doing at your community to create greater equity in the services you provide. I think that you provided some great mantras, I think, for a lot of utilities to live by. One of my favorites that came from you is, know better, do better. Right. And I think that fundamentally that is, something that every utility and every municipality should live by. So thank you for sharing that. Mm-hmm. I also wanted to say too that now is a great opportunity for people that do have questions for Cathy to either put them in the chat box, and we'll get to them as they come through. But for the time being, Cathy, maybe I'll start the ball rolling by asking you a quick question on some of the challenges, I guess, or some of the recommendations you might have for utilities that are just kind of starting off on this path or this journey for water equity. So what would you say is the most important element or most important initiative that a municipality or utility can implement when they're early on in their process? Or what should we get right and make sure that we get right so that we do take that first step, in the positive direction?
So I think early on is the conversation internally, right? I didn't talk about it, but when we were all around that table, it was the first time that we were really having some heart-to-heart conversations about who we wanted to be and how we wanted to be different as we showed up in the community. It was not me driving the conversation. It was a number of people around the room saying, well, what are we trying to do? And who are we? And how do we want to show up? And I think, having that initial conversation and really getting the buy-in that here's who we are and here's the new lens of equity that we want to apply, and here's how we're going to move forward with that lens. That initial conversation, I think, is the thing that you really want to get right. Because once you get that right, then that really gives you the foundation for your problem solving, but with that purpose in mind.
That's great. And I find too that, I think there's a willingness right now in the community to have these conversations. So, taking on that role and keeping that momentum going is so important.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, we did have a question in the chat here that kind of was a curious question on some of the challenges that you were seeing in your community, Cathy. So the audience member was asking how many shutoffs does Cincinnati typically have in a year? Maybe relative to about 100,000 people, for instance, like a rough range.
Yeah, so we have, so just to tell you a little bit about us, so we have, we serve the Greater Cincinnati area. So we have 243,000 connections, customer accounts, but we serve about 1.2 million people in our area. Probably on an average year, we might provide maybe 10,000 notices. And by notices, I mean, we went out to your property and put a door hanger on your property that says you're eligible to shut off. And probably from that 10,000, we're looking at pre-COVID, we were probably at 5,500 maybe per year, actual shutoffs that we did. Since COVID, we're down from that because we've tried, number one, we're not as strict with shutoffs because we still realize that we're recovering. And we're trying to not do as many. I mean, it doesn't do us any good to have our community, have households without water. So I'd say this last year, we were probably down at like the 3,600, but that we haven't had a full year since we started doing, shutoffs again. Yeah.
That's great. Appreciate that, Cathy. And I know that the second part of that question was a comparison to how much shutoffs are here in Kitchener. And that information I just don't have available with me right now, but we will post it online afterwards. We do have another question in terms of kind of buy-in from council and stuff, particularly around the lead service line replacement program that you had, Cathy. How difficult was it to convince your council that the utilities should be responsible for paying the full cost of that service line replacement? From just an affordability side of things, it must have been really hard to get by council because that must have been a significant cost contributor.
Yeah, it was. But for those who know me, I'm a talker. And when I talk, I am full of data. So if I'm going to council, I've got all my data lined up, right? And I am going to give the best compelling story that I can. And so in order to really get them to buy in, I made the rounds individually to each council member to give them a pre-show, right? Here's the deal. Here's what we're facing, and then there was one council member in particular that was behind us from the beginning. And so he made the rounds to the council members to say, hey, this is important. This is a positive thing we need to do in our community. We need to do it, and so I did have some help from that council member. But it was very hard. It was one of those moments, I haven't had many moments where I've been in council and I've been sweating and pulling out my afro and my hair, but I was definitely doing all of that with this one because it took some doing to convince them. And the harder part of what I had to convince them with is I knew that I had to go for more than 1 year of rate increases at a time. And so I asked them for approval for 5-year rate increases in one vote, because I needed to have assurance that they were behind the program, not something that they would vote 1 year on and then next year they wanted to get rid of it. And so that was probably the bigger thing that I was worried about. Would they approve the multi-year rate increase? Because this was the first time in our history, 200 some years, where we had asked for a multi-year rate increase at one time. And so we were able to achieve that as well. But it was pretty scary, but we made it happen.
Wow. So multi-year rate increases, I know is a challenge for most municipalities here in Canada. Any strategies that you used to just maybe utilizing that compelling argument, I guess, was kind of the strategy there, right?
Yeah, I mean, we were very vulnerable with that. I mean, I just flat out took, put it to them and said, it will not make sense for us to get 1 year of rate increases and have a new council come back the following year and not approve this. And so we need you to put that aside and know that this is a long-term program and that we need your vote to make it happen, and so we were very vulnerable. We had all our financials and we had all that stuff reviewed, and legal and everybody else who had to have a stab at it. They did their part, and they were also, providing their testimony against it and for it and everything. But it was a team of people who put it together, but really just being vulnerable to say, hey, it will do none of us any good for you to just vote for this for 1 year. And so we need you. Please do this. We just put it out there, and they were behind it.
Right. And I guess this follow-up question is kind of along the same lines as getting that council buy-in. It's also, I think, about partnerships, right? You alluded to this in your presentation about how you were drawing on other not-for-profit groups and others in the community to really drive this program. Can you speak a little bit about kind of that importance around partnerships?
Yes, when we went to council, part of my presentation to them was to tell them it's going to take a village. It's not just the water utility doing it. I told them, I said, we're going to need plenty of partners, and I'm going to need you to understand that I've got to be out in the community to work and maintain these relationships and get these partnerships. And they understood that. And so we went down a path and, partnered with the health department, partnered with the Council of Aging, with the public schools, so they could be messengers and send flyers home, to partner with other organizations and other municipalities, leagues of municipalities, neighboring communities. We just did whatever we could to have all of these partnerships, because we knew it was going to be important for many people to be, speaking the same language that we were. And so we forged all these partnerships, and then we had key people in the organization to maintain those relationships. And that was helpful because, number one, it also gave employees a new connection to the community, a new way for them to learn about the community, and then to show up and play a different role in the community. And so in many ways, it got some employees outside of their day work, to have these new roles. And that was good for them to have that experience as well. And so we're still on that path of making sure that we have those connections, relationships with many organizations within our community to help us get this work done.
Yeah, and such an important point that you just raised there, Cathy. It's not just about making the relationships, it's about keeping those relationships and moving forward and forging a path forward together. That's great. There seems to be a lot of interest here on the shutoffs and kind of the lessons learned that you had from the shutoff program there. And one question was, how effective were the shutoffs, or how effective the shutoffs have been for your utility, and whether or not you might have seen an improvement in gaining compliance with a different approach.
Yeah, so you're going to get me to use some of my choice words. So shutoffs suck, right? they do. And I do not like shutoffs. And we're challenged with trying to find a different way to handle, when bills aren't paid. We know some utilities that, have devices that have a slower, there's a valve basically. So it just trickles in a little bit of water, enough for them to use every day, but not the free flowing water that they normally have. So in essence, it's not a shut off, but it's a slow trickle of water, that, hey, you probably will get tired of that slow trickle of water and maybe find a better way to pay your bill. It's that kind of stuff. We can't do that in our community. We still have these lead lines. And if the water is sitting in these lead lines, for a length of time, chances are that some of that lead can be leaching if the water is not free flowing through the lines. And that creates a different problem that we don't want to have. So we can't do that. So we struggle with what to do. We're thinking about different technology. We have AMR for our meter reading. We're thinking about AMI. Maybe that might be of some solution in certain neighborhoods, but we just don't have a better way to handle it right now. And we continue to rack our brain to figure out what that looks like. But I do not like shutoffs. I don't. And we just haven't come up with a better solution yet, but know that we're working on it.
That's great. And I think that's a big challenge for municipalities and utilities across the country. And I agree with you, shutoffs suck. Right? That's not the approach that we want to take, particularly because we're trying to humanize the utility. And you've talked about humanizing the utility, and that's counter to kind of
right.
And maybe, I'm looking at the time, noticing that we are coming close to the end of time, but maybe this last question is a good way to end it. And it's about humanizing the utility. So are there tricks and tips that you could have around how we humanize that utility, particularly around, professionals that might have to go into rural areas or areas where, there may not be that interaction with the utility that often, or maybe even, in situations where people have never experienced like a shut off or a service disruption. So how best would we humanize that utility and kind of get that across to people?
I think what the approach that we've done is we got out of the way of ourselves and always trying to be, politically correct, right? And we'd have to send this level person over there, or this type of person over there, and do this and that, whatever. And we just got back to the basics and said, who knows something about that neighborhood? Who knows who lives in that neighborhood? Who wants to go to that neighborhood? Who has a connection in that neighborhood? And probably 9 out of 10 times, somebody raised their hand and said, I live there. And so it's important for me to be there. And people will take to me, it will resonate with them because I live in that community, and they'll see that I'm working at the utility and I'm coming to share information. And so I think sometimes we just don't go back to the basics, right? We need to go back to the basics and figure out the easy ways to talk to people, to have relationships, not text them, not email them, but figure out how we can connect and talk and just have a real conversation and get to know each other. And that's how we get back to humanizing utility, building trust, positively impacting the community, being an anchor institution, and having equitable solutions that we can bring forward.
It's so well said. I don't think I could summarize that any better. So, one last comment, I guess. It's a comment that's getting a lot of upvoting here on the Q&A. And it's not a question. It's just people wanting to thank you for your wonderful presentation today, Cathy. And the specific quote here is that I commend you for all the work that you and your team have done. And I think there's a recognition that, that there's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that have gone into this. And, the fruits of your labor are definitely showing. It's an example that I think that most of us can take away and hopefully helps inspire us to enact some change in our communities. So with that, we are coming up to the end of our time. And again, you've provided some great examples for us, Cathy, to kind of take with us and learn, and then hopefully enact within our own communities. I wanted to also thank the audience for joining us today in the conversation, and really showing just the importance of this talk on equity and why it's so important for us to start incorporating this equity lens in a lot of the work that we do as water utilities. And, as water utilities, I think one of the things that we always want to do is we want to make sure that we are providing the best possible quality service to our citizens. But when we apply the equity lens, we can ensure that all residents can access and benefit from those services. And I think that's the important piece. So the team has popped a web link into the chat. The web link is engagewr.ca/speaker series. That link is going to, if you go to that link, it'll notify you about future equity events in the series. It also gives you an opportunity to continue this discussion and participate. We're also going to have a recording of this session that's going to be made available. And we're also asking for some feedback. So if you have time and are willing to provide answers to a short 2-minute survey, please visit that link and provide that feedback. That will help us improve for future sessions. So again, until we meet again, let's continue the conversation on equity. I thank you again, Cathy, for everything that you've provided in terms of your insight and your presentation. And again, thank you all for attending today. Stay safe and be well.
Thank you.